concentrating solar for Chevron so they can do some oil extraction there. But this thing was massive. I mean, I could see it from the airplane. Like I said, it was the size of Coalinga. Maybe Coalinga's not that big, but it looked pretty big to me. Anyway, so that's one kind of, move the desert tortoises out of the way and put in the solar panels, or put the big wind turbines up in the mountain pass. That can be challenging though. You need transmission lines out to these places. You do have these endangered species concerns. The permitting process has been a pain. So here's an example. This is from someone who worked at Solar Millennium. They worked on a Blythe solar project, and this was actually they had 2 bookshelves that looked like this. This was the permit for their project. And I've got a timeline here. You can't see all the details here, but basically, Blythe and Palin, 2 projects here. Basically the original application filed in end of '06 here for Blythe. Finally executed in November 4th, 2010. It's 4 years. Then you got August '07, down to the first quarter of 2011. And the process has improved a bit, but you can see there's just a lot of challenges with the big central station solar. So we focus more on our work at the UCs on what's called distributed or localized clean energy, distributed generation. And just to kind of give a quick definition, so the distribution grid is essentially everything, all the electricity lines on wood, and that's kind of a simple way to look at it, as opposed to the big transmission lines. So some people say it's 20 megawatts or less, but we like to think of it as on-site or close to load. It's close to where people are actually using the electricity. Interconnected to the grid, it can be wind, solar, biomass. You don't need the transmission lines. You can deploy it immediately because you don't have this, the same permitting concerns in a lot of cases that you would have with some of the large central station stuff. And some of the studies we've seen have shown that it can provide up to 128 to 213% of offsite of this large central station type of renewable energy. So ultimately you need a mix in California. I'm not trying to say that we don't need large scale. The governor's goal is that of the 20,000 megawatts we need in California to come from renewable energy, which equals the 33%, that we want 12,000 of that to come from this distributed generation, or this localized clean energy, and then the other 8,000 can come from large scale. So it's going to be a mix, but there's a lot of benefits in terms of permitting and efficiency and land usage to having it be more distributed. And some of the kind of quick policy ideas behind it, trying to encourage more DG, as it's abbreviated to, is figuring out a better utility payment plans. Does anyone in this room have solar panels on their roof? Got a few folks. So all of you get retail credit, right? You never get a check sent to you. So that's what's called the net metering program, where basically you have solar panels on your roof. It's not going into your house, it's going into the grid. And then what happens is that your utility gives you a retail credit, so your electricity bill is reduced by whatever amount you're producing. And over a year, it'll kind of account for all of your electricity usage and all the energy you provided, and it'll kind of do it kind of a true up. That's one model, and it's certainly important in California. It's led to a lot of these residential home installations. The other model is called a feed-in tariff. If you ever go to Germany, I haven't been, but I've talked to people who do. You fly in, there's solar on almost, I shouldn't say every rooftop, but it's ubiquitous. I mean, they're the real leader in rooftop solar. It's because they have this feed-in tariff program. It's a terrible name. I think it's some wealthy foundation spent a lot of money to rebrand it, and I think their acronym now is CLEAN, local, energy, accessible now, something like that. So if you want to call it that, go ahead. Feed-in tariff, though, is a terrible name, but basically what it means is you get a cash payment. No more retail credit. You actually get cash for the energy you provide. And it's great for certain businesses, like let's say you're a warehouse where you don't have a lot of on-site energy usage. So solar panels, if they reduce your energy bill, it doesn't matter. If you have a huge roof, you're producing so much electricity that the credit doesn't mean much to you. But if you get paid for that, it's a whole great revenue stream. So you can get commercial rooftops going, you can get parking lots, all sorts of things. And we do have models, payment models to make that happen now, but feed-in tariffs are a very elegant way to do it, even if they're not elegantly named. And we now have one in California. We haven't had one for a while, but it's pretty ineffectively priced. And there's this reverse auction type of feed-in tariff now that the Public Utilities Commission is exploring. It's kind of wonky, so I won't go into details, but if you're interested, you can write down reverse auction mechanism, PUC, and Google it, and then it'll explain it all to you. So that's the utility kind of payment plans are critical. I think second, it's about standardized permitting. The permitting process for doing this with the patchwork of local government jurisdictions can be confusing. Germany, I've seen slides where they have, you saw my permit slide there, just to get your home energy system set up, it's a big stack of paper. In Germany, it's something like 2 pages. You just sign on the bottom there. So we need to get to that level. Interconnection process with utilities, to sign up to interconnect with the grid. It's kind of a black box for most people, the developers who are in the industry, and figuring out a way to really prioritize interconnection for the projects where we want to see them, and trying to make it a more transparent process, I think would be helpful. And then finally, when we talk about this 12,000 megawatt goal the governor's office has, it's going to involve a lot of planning. And that's local planning, so local governments need to include kind of a renewable energy forecast in their land use plans. So I talked earlier about plans for their downtowns. Well, I think they should also be planning for where renewable energy is going to go in the community. And then that should coordinate with regional plans for energy deployment, and then all that needs to be synced up with what the utilities are planning, because you don't want to just plan for that in a vacuum. We want to put this stuff where we have the capacity on the grid, where we already have the existing distribution and transmission lines to hook in and make it as efficient as possible. So that would be my take-home points for that, for renewable energy. And then I want to talk, the last subject I want to talk about, and I'll be brief on this one since the pie chart wedges are getting more narrow now, is what we're going to do about integrating this energy, this renewable energy. So the sun doesn't always shine, the wind doesn't always blow. It's variable, intermittent energy that we're starting to rely on more and more. And utilities, if you listen to them, they freak out because this is threatening reliability. We don't want blackouts. I think there's a lot of merit to that. I have this chart here that I pulled off the web for a profile of a solar energy day. So you can see the sun rising and setting, but clouds pass over, maybe a rainstorm comes through, that sort of thing. You have huge dips. And it's right now they say, well, we can manage this fine. We don't need any new amazing breakthroughs. But the problem is when they talk about how to manage it, a lot of it boils down to natural gas to compensate for this variability. And some of the studies that we've seen indicate that if you start to use natural gas enough to do this kind of compensation, you're almost to the point where you're neutralizing your greenhouse gas benefits. So all this renewables we're putting online, if we're using natural gas to fill in the dips, it's going to be a real problem. So we've looked at energy storage as really, it's called the holy grail of clean tech, and I think of trying to have a more renewable, sustainable grid. So energy storage, I think the common visual behind it would be a battery, basically a way to capture energy when it's produced and then dispatch it at a time when you really need it. So for example, if you have wind blowing at night and the wind turbines are really going, but everyone's asleep, maybe they're charging their iPhones or whatnot, they don't have a big load. What you need to do is capture that and then use it during the hottest part of the day when everyone's cranking their air conditioning units. So that's just a very simplistic example. But if we can capture that intermittent energy, a solar farm could have on-site energy storage, and then instead of just feeding that kind of intermittent energy into the grid, it can capture it and provide a smooth output that would mimic some of the generating stations that we already have. If we move towards a more decentralized source of energy generation, then we may need more on-site, customer, community-centered energy storage, battery units that the neighborhoods are sharing. I shouldn't just say batteries, there's other technologies. We use them already. Pumped hydro is a mature energy storage technology. When I say pumped hydro, I'm talking about moving water kind of at different elevation ranges. So how many people here have driven by Pyramid Lake on I-5 going down to Los Angeles? So you see a little kind of pyramid-looking thing there. That's a pumped hydro system right there. So there's 2 reservoirs at different elevations, and at night when energy is cheap, they sometimes will pump water uphill, and then they'll release it downhill during the middle of the day, and it's called arbitrage because it's cheaper electricity at night. And even though it's not as you lose some of the energy pumping uphill, it's not a perfect recapture, you end up making money doing it that way. That's how some of the California State Water Project works. We all know, being here in Northern California, that Southern California steals our water. This is my UC Berkeley hat talking, since I think I'm from the audience. So we ship a lot, I shouldn't say that, they get a lot of water from the Colorado River and other places, and groundwater. But anyways, we're shipping water down to Southern California, and we do it via the San Luis Reservoir. It's kind of by Monterey, but towards the Central Valley, and we pump that water uphill, and then we have to get it back downhill to a higher elevation, and we try to recapture some of that energy. It's not really exactly a pumped hydro system in the way we think of it, but it's a way to keep the California State Water Project from using so much electricity. That's another example. Flywheels, spinning discs, multiple battery technologies, compressed air, energy storage is another one where you pump air into a cavern and then pressurize it. It could be maybe instead of a cavern, just some sort of contained structure, and release it when you need that energy. That's the question.
If you have more of the distributed, localized, does that smooth out some of these peaks and valleys in that it may be sunny over here, not over here, and you know, but on average, the amount of energy going into the grid is a little more stable than these large systems?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it actually makes me realize I did kind of give short shrift to another possible way to balance out some of the intermittency, which is that if you have a large network, you know, across the western United States, for example, you know, so it's cloudy in LA, it's sunny in Nevada, you know, that's no, you know, then you can kind of work it out. So yes, to some extent, but it does get a little complicated. First of all, you know, we want to favor in-state energy in California, so I don't know, you know, how well we're going to play as a kind of region of the United States together, but I think eventually we can get to a, you know, kind of balance it out in a regional way like that. You know, from an individual standpoint, if you sunk a lot of money into, in other words, it may involve a little bit of some curtailment of energy. I think that's where we might be heading. So if you invested in an individual solar farm, you know, it may get to the point where, you know, to try to keep things level, not all of your energy is going to be purchased. It's not going to be taken. And so, you know, what happens then? You signed contracts expecting to get paid for a certain amount. And if we really truly get to a place where we're, you know, super renewable across the region, you know, the western region of the United States, you know, what we kind of need to do is get to an overproduction point where then we can, you know, as things kind of up and down, we're okay. But that means that some people aren't going to get paid. I mean, there are others maybe more expert on this than I am, but that's one of the problems that I see with it. But yeah, and with distributed generation, it may have the same problem. If you have homeowners whose systems are kind of getting shut off. I mean, we're not there yet, but yes, you're right. The more distributed we are, the more of a region, the more balancing we can do. But energy storage will, if you look at the studies, be a critical piece of this. It's going to be hard to avoid the need for some sort of technology to address the issue. And then the other kind of smaller factor, I shouldn't say smaller factor, is demand response and smart grid, where basically we have a smarter grid that is automated, that communicates, so it can take into account these peaks and valleys and send signals to homes, shut things down. So we've got refrigerators, for example, that turn on every hour. You don't need to go on every hour to keep your food from spoiling. They could be delayed. You know, the freezing cycle could be delayed 5 to 10 minutes. Your washing machine can be delayed from the start. So if you have a grid that's interacting with appliances and doing that kind of demand response type of a function where it's actually getting, you know, managing the demand a little bit so that it can match with this intermittent supply. And that takes a lot of investments, and that's where the smart grid comes into play, because you now need a sort of talking grid where it's talking to your appliances and talking to your home energy usage. I think there's a lot of incentives, particularly for investor-owned utilities, to invest in this because they can get paid back by ratepayers for it, but we still do need more investments and more research into how it will work. So some quick take-home points on how to scale up, particularly the energy storage market. A lot of this is about how we're going to monetize those benefits. So if you have a battery or a battery system that you could place along the grid, and what that means is you're not going to have to spend money potentially on other things. You're not going to have to spend money to upgrade you're not going to spend money to upgrade that congested substation potentially, or build a new transmission line, or as big a transmission line. But right now, energy storage technologies can't take advantage of money that you would have spent. How do you document that the utility would have spent that money on something else? So figuring out a way where they can capture that value stream of avoided investments and things is going to be really key. Secondly, opening markets. We're in a regulated structure with electricity. It's monopolies, and it's highly regulated. And a lot of the rules about how energy is supplied favor traditional generators. So, for example, a great example is a rule that FERC had put out, where basically energy providers would get paid on hourly increments for the electricity they supply over an hour. Well, certain technologies like flywheels can outperform a traditional fossil fuel-based generator in a 15-minute interval because they have short bursts of power. It's spinning disks that, you know, they can't spin forever, but you can pull off energy for short bursts. And by changing the time frame of the market from an hour to 15 minutes, suddenly it becomes competitive for flywheels. So, you know, there are some fixes that don't require subsidies or mandates or anything. They're just about opening markets to the technologies. Having said that, though, I think we do need more incentives for energy storage. California's gone a good way allowing the self-generating incentive program to cover energy storage technologies, and we have some research dollars, but we need more of it for demonstration projects and more dollars for transportation. Not for transportation, but for investment in battery research. And the interesting wild card here is electric vehicles, because electric vehicles, of course, need batteries to operate. And what that means is we're getting to a point as you have major automobile makers like Nissan investing literally billions of dollars in battery technology, that we're suddenly seeing, the potential for some major breakthroughs and major decreases in costs as we bring down manufacturing costs. And the nice thing about that is that this is private investment in these technologies. This is not government subsidies. Every time you go in to buy a Leaf or a Volt, in a sense you're subsidizing battery research. The other interesting part about electric vehicles is that you have the potential to provide some grid services with those electric vehicles. Let's say we could get by 2025 1.5 million electric vehicles. They're all charging at night. For a grid operator, that's a nice source of potentially balancing of the grid. So it's not so much that those batteries and the cars are going to put electricity back into the grid, but you may be able to control their rate of charging. So they charge, at high rates and then and lower rates depending on the needs of the grid. So it becomes an interesting network and a tool for grid operators, potentially a way to get paid by owning an electric vehicle because you're providing a grid service. So that can help lower the costs of purchasing an electric vehicle. And then finally, you've got second life options for the battery. So you drive an electric vehicle after about 7 years, that battery is no longer going to work in your car, but you can now sell it to a utility. It's still got a good life there, right? It's 70–80% capacity. You can sell it to a utility. You could buy all these second used batteries, aggregate them, and you've got a bulk energy storage option. And it's also something, again, that can bring down the cost of buying that electric vehicle. So those are just some of the areas I wanted to flag for your attention. So as a kind of a summary, I just wanted to kind of recap that California is really taking a leadership position here when it comes to addressing climate change. We're scaling up some industries that are bringing in a lot of private investment into California and are leading to some jobs and investment, whether it's land use and addressing the vehicle miles traveled question, looking at the retrofit stock of housing that's available, and particularly trying to focus on those areas where it makes the most sense. It's easy for people in Berkeley or La Jolla to say, hey, I got an energy efficient house. But they're in pretty mild climates. We really want to focus on folks in the Mojave Desert and maybe in the Valley area where it's hot and you have colder winters and hot summers. But we're trying to innovate some of those programs. And then clean tech innovations that have been happening, Silicon Valley, a lot of venture capital, biofuels, solar installers, energy storage. And I think we've seen jobs result from that kind of investment. And then finally, it's hard to imagine, but there could come a point where at a federal level, we may get a consensus that we need to address the climate problem. And it may just start with bits and pieces, energy efficiency standards, renewable energy standards. But the fact that California is doing this now, we're kind of a guinea pig. Cap and trade program, I think, is a good example of that, where if we can get it right in California, it may become a model. Similarly to how the Massachusetts healthcare program was a model for national healthcare. So, hopefully we'll see something, not that Mitt Romney wants to admit to that, but this is my pundit side. And so we'll see what happens, but I think it's an exciting time to be in California because the public is behind this, the market is behind it, and, and that makes all the difference in the world. And we're seeing the leadership, if not in other areas in the state, certainly on the environment. And here's my contact info. I'd be happy to take questions now. And if any of you are interested in the white papers, like I said, there's a few up here. You can download them from these websites. And we've got a blog, a joint UCLA, UC Berkeley blog. And Reed, any of my colleagues from UCLA is here, and he blogs on there. And yeah, so we're always opining about what's going on in California. So thank you very much, and happy to take questions. Yes.
Hi, thanks so much for a comprehensive overview and the solutions that you offered. I really appreciate the specifics and kind of where do we go from here? Are there new policies that we need, or we need to better implement the existing policies and regulations, more research? I mean, do you have that kind of scope? And I missed the first part, and you mentioned it's in your white papers, but kind of scoping out more detailed next steps.
It's a good question. I mean, I think, you know, some of the policy ideas that I had, you know, for each area, I think kind of encapsulate immediate next steps for any given issue area. I think we already have some great leadership happening in the state. I mean, we're really well ahead of the game. Air Resources Board is really on top of a lot of these things. Legislature too. The challenge is we don't have a lot of money, resources to invest in this. You know, in almost every workshop that we had, financing came up as a big issue. Because essentially what we're trying to do is transition to a different kind of economy. And we need to invest up front in things that will benefit us down the road. But so, you know, you think about next steps, it's things like, you know, providing local governments with that planning money so they can plan for better communities. You can do that up front, you save a lot of money, you get much better communities because the developers aren't doing this ad hoc. It saves them money, they can build bigger units, more units. So, you know, that's part of it. Planning for renewable energy means you can address a lot of the environmental issues, not on a project by project basis, but on a kind of regional scale. That's a big part of it. Certainly financing improvements to the building stock. So trying to get PACE revitalized, trying to figure out ways of getting money in the hands of people who want to do those kind of things. And then, of course, investment in renewables and energy storage. A lot of that's happening on the private sector side. The public sector can do a lot too. One thing I didn't mention about energy storage, for example, is that the legislature passed a law saying that the Public Utilities Commission can actually mandate that utilities buy a certain amount of energy storage technologies. And there's a proceeding now that's going on, and you know, they may not set mandates, but I mean there are some levers there. If they wanted to, they could really jumpstart what utilities have to do, and jumpstart potentially an energy storage market. And on every one of these, you know, I encourage you to come look at the white papers. We've got a lot of recommendations for federal, state, local leaders can do, what the businesses themselves can do for best practices. So there's a lot of things, but the good news is I think we're on the right path as much as we can be in the state. Other questions?
Well, you mentioned the fast tracking with respect to infill and 375 and all. What about on renewables? Is there movement in that area to fast track the approval of renewables?
Yeah, and the Energy Commission, for example, has gotten a lot better about, you know, improving the process. In terms of environmental reviews and streamlining things, Energy Commission has probably a better, well, I shouldn't say better, but a faster environmental review process. They have a kind of a special carve out for permitting solar thermal projects, and some of the projects start out as solar thermal and switch to PV, which would have put them out of CEC jurisdiction, were by statute allowed to stay in the CEC, and there's kind of a, you know, from a developer perspective, potentially a better process there. Governor's office has looked into that issue of trying to streamline. I think their idea about regional and local planning is an effort to streamline, because you've got those programmatic documents done, you do an assessment at a bigger scale so the projects can then benefit from that. So it's definitely something that people are aware of. But there's unforeseeable issues. You know, endangered species is a big one. You just don't know how many tortoises are going to be there until, you know, I mean, you do a survey. They did one up at the Ivanpah project. Los Angeles Times did a big profile of it. And they thought there were going to be, you know, X many tortoises, and it turned out there was a mother load of tortoises, and you know they tried to put them in pens, and they all kind of went crazy in there. And I mean, it's pretty heartbreaking stuff. And there's only so much you can do. You know, you just do your assessments, but until you get in there, you never really know. So, and same thing with archaeological impacts. You know, sometimes you start digging, and then whoa, there's a burial ground. So.
Do any of the white papers cover the issue you mentioned of EV battery second life? That's kind of an evolving area.
So we did a paper on energy storage, and I think we mentioned it in there. We also did another project after our bidding from the Energy Commission here oversaw a pretty in-depth research project that we did on energy storage, kind of a vision for energy storage for 2020. We talked about that as a potential option. I think, you know, the basic conclusion that we got out of it was that there needs to be a little bit more research done about, you know, how these second life batteries are going to perform in a utility application, utility scale application. So that may be a question mark, but I think it's a very promising area. I'm pretty interested in it myself. I mean, I think and if you can monetize that sale down the road up front, you could potentially knock off the cost of electric vehicles by potentially a lot of money. I mean, if a battery new costs $15,000, but you can sell it used for maybe $10,000 at 80% capacity, you know, if we can just give people $6,000 or $8,000 of that up front, that's a huge amount to reduce off the sticker price of an electric vehicle. So we may have mentioned it in this white paper, but if not, we did another report for the Energy Commission. I'm a lawyer. I talk to engineers, but I don't know that, I'm not an expert on the kind of engineering implications of doing that. But certainly from a policy standpoint, it's very promising.
So you talked a lot about California and California initiatives, and I'm wondering, the way it's worked historically is that we have policy innovation in the states, and the states learn from one another, and you see this sort of contagion effect taking over, and innovation happens as a consequence. Are we seeing any of that? We certainly see it with automobiles, but are we seeing any of it with other kinds of energy efficiency?
Yeah, great question. I don't mean to make it sound like we're doing everything the best here. I mean, there are a lot of areas in the environmental space where I think California is lagging, and we can learn from other states. On the land use side, I think it's pretty widely recognized that states such as Maryland, Washington, Oregon are much better about how their land use patterns take shape. They're kind of called smart growth states, but it's a little more state-directed kind of a process. And we're much more decentralized here in California. It's voter revolt time if you try to mess with local authority over land use. And that's an area where I think we can learn some things. On the energy efficiency side, absolutely. There's been a lot of innovation around the world on energy efficiency. New York City has a pretty strict ordinance about commercial buildings needing to get retrofitted every 10 years, I think, or they have to meet some sort of standard. Maine has some legislation, Austin, Texas, requiring energy audits, at time of sale of a property. England, or Great Britain, I never know how to say it, they have, I'm trying to remember the exact program that they have, but there's a whole disclosure about energy usage before you buy a home.
That's right.
Okay, that's good. So I wasn't just saying that encrypted it. But yeah, so that's an example of where other jurisdictions are farther ahead of us on energy efficiency. Energy storage, certainly we've learned from other states. Texas is pretty good on energy storage, I think because they have so many kind of stranded wind farms they want to do something with. But and some of the ISOs and other jurisdictions have had some pretty innovative policies that we can learn from. But I think we might be the farthest ahead on energy storage because we have this the law that directs this proceeding to happen, which empowers the Public Utilities Commission to do the mandates. And we also have a lot of research, a lot of technologies based here. But Japan has done a lot with batteries. You think about the arguments for energy storage, people say, well, it's very expensive. How much would batteries have cost at the Fukushima nuclear plant? And if they could have kept that thing running for a few more days, think of how many hundreds of billions of dollars, 10 lives could have been saved. So how much would on-site batteries? I think they had some on-site batteries there, they just weren't enough. So, you think about those kind of catastrophic scenarios, investment in energy storage seems pretty cheap. So I think Japan and I think China is also doing some stuff in energy storage. The renewables, I mentioned Germany and Italy, Spain, they all had pretty comprehensive feed-in tariff programs. Electric vehicles, we can look at Israel as pretty advanced. So yeah, we're not the best here, but we're pretty good.
You mentioned the renewable energy goals. What are the consequences under the laws or whatever they are if we don't meet the goals in 2030?
It kind of reminds me of the scene from Team America, if anybody's seen that movie, where they kind of make fun of Hans Blix, the UN weapons inspector, going to talk to a North Korean leader and saying, if you don't do this, we're going to write you a very sternly worded letter expressing how upset we are with you. So I think basically that's probably what they get, very sternly worded. I don't know, I'm just saying that somewhat flippantly, but there was no consequences for them not meeting the 2010 goal. Now, of course, they were on pace, so I think people felt like it was okay. And there are penalties available. They could levy fines for not complying. There could be daily penalties every day they're not in compliance. So there are enforcement mechanisms. The question is, politically and otherwise, does the Public Utilities Commission want to really clamp down? But look, the utilities are responding. They're moving in that direction. So, I think we'll just have to kind of see. This is all just targets, and we're hoping they can get there. But there may be reasons that are out of their control why they can't meet the target. We'll have to just kind of see what happens when we get out there and see where, what life is like on the ground.
The renewable goal, is it clear that should be generation as opposed to usage?
Sales.
Sales, yeah.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be.
So it's 33% of the energy generated in California has to come from renewable sources.
Sales.
Yeah, that's what I thought, yeah. I know here locally, quite a bit of the renewable comes down from Oregon or wherever.
Yeah, so you're in the SMUD territory, right? I'll have to go back and double check, but I thought it was Okay, all right.
Retail,
Okay, so we're getting, all right, so maybe it's retail sales.
which incorporates usage, because that's
Don't sell
how
electricity,
much
don't use
sales
it.
are.
Yeah, right, it's
Yeah,
used to
so
sell
it's all-
but
it all-
but, there's some of us that think it should
It
be
all works.
generated.
Yeah, well, my understanding was that it was energy generated, had to come
Yeah,
from
well,
renewable sources, but
Sales.
sales, okay, all right, I'm getting vetoed here, so it's definitely sales. And I shall say the definition of what a renewable energy source is becomes controversial as well. So for example, we've excluded large hydro from renewable portfolio. Small hydro is okay. You know, I mean, is nuclear renewable? You know, probably not, but you could make an argument, at least it's not carbon based.
Any other questions? Thanks very much.
Oh, there's one question.
Oh, one more.
Just briefly, how do we get the public on board with this? Aside from giving them financial means to do it, are people persuaded? What does your information say?
Yeah, marketing and outreach is a key part of almost every issue that we've come across. Some of it, it kind of happens on its own. I think with renewable energy on rooftops, for example, it's easy, a little easier to do. It's high profile. Things like energy efficiency, you really got to just get the word out and make the case. You need a good marketing campaign. People cite examples, of different kind of public education campaigns. The anti-tobacco campaign is one example. How do we really let people think first about efficiency and retrofit improvements? Electric vehicles, that's another challenge. Convincing people that the car's not going to explode, that you're not driving a big golf cart. It may take the people who drive the cars to make the case to their friends and neighbors. And then I think in terms of the overarching vision, we just need some good leadership. And I guess this alludes back to what I was saying at the beginning of the talk about the environmental movement. That it's hard to really think about who's presenting a very positive vision for where we can go as a state. Environmentally, environmentalists I think are very, they're split and they're focused on narrow issues. But who's really presenting a compelling vision for what we can do in California? The kind of lifestyle that we can lead. I think it could be an exciting vision for a lot of people to truly live in a resource-efficient, self-sustaining community that you're benefiting your local environment, your local economy. All the money that we send to utilities, to gas companies, natural gas, oil companies. Every time you turn on the light, think of the waste. Think of the entities you're enriching, and the idea you can put together a compelling argument that this is a way to empower people, to empower yourself. You can feel good about turning on the light switch because it's coming from a clean source that's generated locally. It's providing local jobs, and it may be cheaper. As a result. So you have smart grid applications telling appliances to shut off. It could be saving you electricity, allowing you to manage your electricity portfolio better. So certainly on the energy side, I think there's a really positive argument to be made there. And on the land use side as well. I think like I was saying in the beginning, it's not about Soviet-style planning. This is about giving people a revitalized community, a good downtown, housing options, a variety of options, an easier way to get around, more convenience. I mean, if you sell it like that, it's exciting to people, and I think it can make people feel positive about the future rather than just demoralized and depressed and powerless about the climate changes that we're in store for, and the lack of control we have over our lives, and how the trade-offs we all have to make for enjoying the lifestyle that we do. So I hope that environmentalists can focus more on that. But right now, honestly, you're seeing more leadership on climate change from venture capitalists than you are from environmentalists. I hate to say it, but they're the ones who are solving the problem, not the environmentalists. And I don't mean to paint a broad brush, because certainly a lot of environmentalists doing great work on renewables, on land use, but not in a cohesive way. We don't have that kind of movement from that quarter.
Have you looked at the public health aspect of co-benefits of active transportation? I saw a study on that was pretty recent.
It's a great point. And public health is a huge part of the equation, particularly on the land use side. Although it is on really all of this. I mean, we talk about carbon, but all these carbon emissions come with hazardous pollution as well in a lot of cases. I mean, these power plants, not just the greenhouse gases we're worried about, but all sorts of hazardous air pollutants. And on the land use side, when you have to have people driving a lot, first of all, they're not healthy. Second of all, people are living next to freeways, they're not active. So public health sector is very interested in land use patterns, and we've worked with some of those folks. It's just another great argument, I think, in favor of doing this anyways. Sometimes they butt up against each other. It's interesting because some of the best infill sites are next to major roadways. And, you know, the studies show that it's not good for kids to live next to a big roadway, but, you know, if it's a great infill spot and people want to live there, you know, so the Bay Area, for example, had a rule calling into question development, the Bay Area air quality management about building next to some of these busier roads. And it was tough. The infill builders were upset about it because it was taking away potentially a large area, because urban areas are heavily impacted, but you know, it's something that needs to be traded. I think there are some compromises. You can put in some mitigation technologies, you know, air filters, certain kinds of windows that really dramatically reduce the risk for people who live in these areas. We're not talking about building right next to a freeway, but even just a kind of busy road can cause health impacts. But generally, the public health community is very interested in this, the active transportation, the reducing the driving, reducing the pollution, cleaning up our energy system.
Thank you very much.
Come get white papers if you want. So I don't have to drive them home.